Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here and for taking the time to come and join the Zoom meeting. I know it's like a super busy time of the year, especially for students who are like finishing the year with finals. Anyway, my name is Valerie Li, and I am an intern for Alameda County District 1 Supervisor David Haubert. And so today's event is organized and led by me as an intern for the county. Unfortunately, Supervisor Haubert is currently traveling, so he is unable to make it today, but regardless, this event is super meaningful in many ways. For those of you who don't know, May is Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, or in other words, AAPI Heritage Month. So if you hear the word AAPI throughout the event, that is what it stands for. Through today's event and by listening to all of our wonderful panelists who, work in distinct fields and take on different roles to support and advocate for the Asian community, it is my goal that you all can gain a deeper appreciation for the significance of AAPI representation in social and political advocacy and be motivated yourselves to contribute to positive change within your communities. But to start off with the event, we're going to have each of our panelists or panelist groups introduce themselves. First, we have Fiona Ma, who is a CPA and currently serves as the 34th Treasurer of California.
Hi, Fiona Ma and my little companion, Mina. Very honored to be here. California State Treasurer, I am your banker. So all the transactions go into, all the revenues go into my office, about $3.7 trillion every year. I manage a short-term portfolio of about $200 billion, and I oversee and distribute all the bonds for the state of California, UC and CSUs, and then also fund and finance affordable housing, schools, public transportation, green energy, advanced manufacturing. I have 5 savings programs. I sit on CalPERS and CalSTRS. So anybody that needs or wants money, come see me.
All right. Next, we have Hudson Liao, who is the founder and executive director of Asians Are Strong, and I'll let him introduce all of that to you.
Hi, everyone. Great segue because Fiona, my nonprofit does need money. So I'll reach out to you. But I got the pleasure of meeting Fiona, I think last year when we did the Joyride movie together and did it for the community. So as Valerie said, I am the executive director and co-founder of Asians Are Strong. That's a grassroots nonprofit focused on empowering and protecting the API community. Born and raised in San Francisco. My daytime job, I work for a health tech startup as the head of growth and marketing. And so I like to use a lot of my technical skills for the community now. I've been a lifetime martial arts practitioner and competitor. And that's kind of where the ethos of Asians Are Strong came from. Me and a lot of friends who were tired of seeing all the attacks on our community came together and wanted to do something. I think we're going to share a little bit more about that journey later, but feel free to ask me any questions.
Yeah. And then next we have Scott Sakakihara, who currently serves as a council member for Union City.
Hi, yeah, I'm Scott. I'm on the council in Union City. Before that, I was a planning commissioner there, and I'm a reservist in the Navy. So I got back from a deployment to the Middle East right before I ran for office a couple of years ago, and actually just got back from Texas yesterday on orders. And I'm the chief of staff for the finance department at a software company. And my AAPI advocacy issues background started back in college. Actually, I was an intern for Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies. And then in law school, I was a political chair for the Law Students Association for Asian Pacific Americans. And then after law school, I was a Japanese American Citizens League fellow with Congresswoman, now Senator Hirono, and then in the Obama White House. And I am a 4th generation Japanese American. So my grandparents were held in internment camps at Manzanar and Poston during World War II. And I grew up in Union City. So did my wife. We met in 1st grade and moved back here after college. So we have 3 kids now, who the oldest is starting at the elementary school where we met.
All right. And then last but certainly not least, we have Freda Lin and Cath Goulding, who are the co-directors of YURI, and I'll let them introduce them as well.
Thanks, Valerie. Yes, we are with YURI Education Project, and we're a business that writes curriculum and develops professional learning with an Asian American perspective. We work with a variety of cultural institutions writing custom curriculum, such as PBS and Smithsonian. Also work with school districts and teachers doing a variety of learning experiences. As you heard, I'm originally from Long Island. My accent is gone. I'm been in California and San Francisco for about 20 years, as you heard me say. Originally went to school out at Northwestern and was a student activist for Asian American Studies as an undergrad, which is what really led me to become a classroom teacher. And we're both former classroom teachers. I was in middle school and high school in Chicago area and the Bay Area teaching history, and just really excited to create this business with Cath, who we met at the Fred Korematsu Institute, which you all may know about in San Francisco. I was the education program director there. And Cath and I met at the Tule Lake pilgrimage on the way to the segregation center up to the border of Oregon and California. So I will let Cath continue our introduction.
Thanks, Valerie, for inviting us to participate in this panel. And thank you, Freda, my lovely co-founder of YURI Education Project. I think Freda summed up our work at YURI best, but I'll just add that we are named after the civil rights activist, Yuri Kochiyama, who just had a birthday. If you don't know anything about Yuri, definitely take a Google of her. Really lifelong activist in the struggle for AAPI in schools. AAPI studies in schools. But anyways, I'm happy to be here with all of you Californians. I am originally from Southern California, a Yonsei, grandparents and mother incarcerated at Gila River and in Jerome, Arkansas. And I was a teacher in Alameda County for a number of years at Newark Memorial High School. I was a 10th, 11th, and 12th grade English language arts teacher. And yes, left the classroom about 14 years ago to work on becoming an education researcher. And my research is in how did the teaching and learning of historical violence, particularly around Asian American history. So thank you so much for asking us to be here today. And we're super excited to talk about education.
Yeah, of course. And I'd like to start off by asking all of you guys some individual questions first so that people can know a little bit more about you guys. So Treasurer Ma and Councilmember Sakakihara, since you both work in politics as AAPI individuals, I'd love to hear a little bit more about, your backgrounds. And so Treasurer Ma, you are like the first woman of color to be elected as California State Treasurer with more votes than any other candidate for treasurer in the state's history. How do you feel holding a position of such importance for the community, and how do you perceive this achievement impacting the future of leadership opportunities for the AAPI community?
Yeah, so first off, my parents were both born in China, immigrated to Hong Kong as kids. They met in Canada, and then we settled in New York. So coming to this country, they, sought the American dream. They wanted us to be one of the lead professions, a lawyer, engineer, accountant, or a doctor. Since I was good at math, I became an accountant, also grew up in Long Island, by the way, also lost my accent, I think, and moved out to California after undergrad, started with one of the big 8 accounting firms in the real estate tax group, left after 5 years because there were no women or senior managers that looked like me, started my own practice at the age of 28 years old, and became the president of the Asian Business Association. So my job was to advocate for more contracting opportunities for women and minority small business owners at the federal, state, local, and even the private sector. So that was the first time I ever got involved in politics, like I said, at 28 years old. And I started to understand that people in politics control the money, the budgets. They set policy by, authoring laws. They use their platform to be a voice for different causes. And I got more and more interested in trying to run for office. Of course, my parents did not want me to run for office. And so it took about 8 years of, getting my MBA, getting married. And then finally my parents said, okay, If you don't win, you can always go back and be an accountant. So ran for the San Francisco Board of Supervisors in 2002 against 7 other candidates. I won. And now, after that, state assembly for 6 years, speaker, ended with speaker pro tem, served on the State Board of Equalization as your friendly tax collector, and then got elected to state treasurer in 2018 and 2022. So this is my passion. This is my calling. I feel like it's my purpose. I wake up every day and I'm happy and grateful that I am in this position and I can help as many people as I can and work on different projects, especially leveling the playing field. So this is my 4th elected position. I've been on the ballot 20 times, haven't lost yet. And people ask me, what's your secret? I say, number 1, I don't want my parents to say I told you so. Number 2, I don't want to ever go back and be an accountant. So that keeps me on my toes. I love California. I'm going to be running for lieutenant governor next because I'm not ready to quit yet. As long as the voters keep voting for me, I will continue to serve in public office.
Yeah, that's really great. And council member, you have had a diverse set of experiences as well, including, law school and service in the Navy Reserves, as you've mentioned. You're now in local politics. So I guess, how do you believe your AAPI background has directly influenced your approach in all of these different roles that you've had?
Yeah, my parents, let's see, my dad grew up as one of 2 Asian Americans in his high school, I think, and my mom was assigned to a room with the only other Asian American woman in her college degree program, maybe for that reason. And then they moved to Union City, and I had a very different experience. And so when I grew up in Union City, today it's majority AAPI. I don't know if it was exactly that when I was growing up, but it was already very diverse. And I remember I had one white friend in kindergarten who came home and asked his mom if he was Filipino. And so that was sort of the community that we grew up in. And there were not a lot of Japanese Americans, but I did know the story of my grandparents' internment. But I really didn't understand what a unique situation I was growing up in until law school. And I was able, in theory, I'm not saying we did this, but you could use a roommate's ID to get in the bar just because he was Asian, because that was the other Asian American in the class. There were a handful, maybe in a section of 80. So it was very different. And then since then, hopping around different bubbles of living in New York and DC, Sacramento, LA, San Francisco, and traveling all around the country to other parts through the Navy. A few things, regardless of which situation, have stuck out. I'm sure we'll cover those today, but one of them is just whether I want to or not, and whether it's fair or not, I do feel viewed as representing this AAPI community monolith in a lot of these contexts. And that certainly brings extra weight and thoughtfulness and a deliberative approach to everything I'm involved in, and knowing that I need to incorporate and reflect those voices, but also that whatever I do is going to be viewed through that lens.
Yeah. And so to Hudson and Cath and Freda, I'm sure that the audience would love to know more about your respective organizations. So Hudson, I guess, what inspired the choice of the name Asians Are Strong for your organization, and how does this name connect with the organization's mission for education and community building and mobilization?
Great question, because people still ask me that every day. And well, give me a little context of how we got started. It was on March 17, 2021, one day after the Atlanta spa shooting. And those in the Bay Area, that was also the day that grandma on Market Street picked up a 2x4 and fought back against her attacker. I think most people were working at home. I think the shelter in place stuff were all still at home, and me and my friend were pretty bothered by what was going on. And so we met up to kind of vent a little, debrief a little at that time. And at that time there wasn't a lot of protest and activation within the community yet. So we wanted to do something to kind of empower our community. We wanted to host a rally that really focused on a positive energy. And so we wanted a name that kind of reflected that as well. It was a reminder to our own community that we are strong and resilient, because at that time we just seen attacks over attacks and nothing else, like no help, no light at the end of the tunnel. And that's why we were so focused on creating something positive. And on the other end, we also want to remind the rest of the world that we're strong people, that you can't just come mess with us as well. And that's so it's two-sided on that. The third reason why we chose Asians Are Strong is because it's kind of weird to say, right? It's a conversation starter. It kind of sticks out. Learning from meaningful names, kind of like Black Lives Matters, three simple words. How did that become a movement? Why did that become a conversation? Why is it weird for some people to say it and not? Even myself, I still kind of, feel a little awkward when I say Asians are strong. I love saying it now because, it's part of our community, but why does saying Asians are strong sound weird? Why does it stick out? Right? What about it creates the conversation for all of us? And so those are kind of main pillars of why we did that. And with our mission as a nonprofit is to protect and empower our AAPI community. So, there's a sense of strength and community around that, and strength in numbers as well. That's why we came up with our call to actions, which is number one, don't be passive. Number two, be your own hero. And number three is be brave together. And so that kind of encompasses all of what we try to hold near and dear to our organization. And last thing, we were coming up with a rally within like 2 weeks with no experience. That was the fastest name I could come up with. And we couldn't come up with a better name after that.
Right. Freda and Cath, you guys have mentioned that YURI prioritizes the creation of educational resources centered around API history. So I guess the question would be, why is it crucial for students to be exposed to API history, and how do you believe this exposure can shape students' perspectives and experiences in the long run?
Yeah, I mean, it's the reason why I became a teacher. I grew up on Long Island as in a very homogenous neighborhood. I was maybe one of 5 Asians, so very different experience than Scott when you were mentioning that. Which is why I'm really happy in California, and I'm always in culture shock now whenever I leave California. But yeah, I mean, I was heavily assimilated, as you may have heard, how Asian Americans can be growing up in those kinds of communities. And it wasn't until I went to college when students organized to create these student organized seminars, since there was no Asian American studies there on campus. And I learned about Vincent Chin, like many Asian Americans have, and it really politicized me in this, it changed my view of myself and an understanding of Asian American identity. And then I learned about Asian American studies when I went to a student conference that was adjacent to it. And it just blew my mind that this was not in the institution. And that if I had learned this earlier in school, I would have a better sense of who I am. And so from that perspective, I think it's so important for so many Asian American and Pacific Islander youth to see themselves in what they learn. And when you don't, it has a really dramatic, terrible effect on your sense of identity of who you are. I mean, I was very angry for a very long time. And in terms of, other non-Asian students in schools, I mean, as Hudson was talking about with all the anti-Asian violence, that was so traumatizing to watch. I could not watch it being in San Francisco. A lot of it comes from that misunderstanding about, I mean, still in history, it's been happening over and over again, just equating Americans of Asian descent as people who are not from this country, who are equivalent to the foreign things that are happening around the world, and therefore they must be blamed in some manner. Which is, Vincent Chin, of course, and COVID and everything. And so, yeah, it's critical to have that in schools. And it's still, I'm still stunned, even in California, how little people know. I still meet people who have never learned about the Japanese American incarceration in California, which is really shocking to me. So yeah, it's very important.
All right. I'd love to talk a little bit more about all of your personal experiences now that people kind of know about what each of you guys do. All of you are individuals in the AAPI community with, diverse and very distinct fields. I guess as an AAPI individual in either social advocacy or politics or education, what is the greatest challenge you guys have each encountered, and what are ways you have overcome this challenge? Council member, would you like to start?
Sure. Yeah. And I don't know if it's the greatest challenge, but since there's multiple panelists, I just wanted to touch on one, which is this belief that Asians are quiet and compliant. So whether it's, I worked at a white shoe New York law firm that had 0 AAPI partners at the time, and in Washington, D.C., and political campaigns with surprisingly few AAPI staff, let alone electeds. And then in Silicon Valley with relatively strong AAPI representation in some ways, but not in others, and the Navy less so. But in each case, there was this pervasive belief that Asians are quiet, meaning we won't speak up, and we're compliant in that we'll go along to get along, toe the line, don't want to ruffle feathers. Obviously, everyone on this call is AAPI. I'm sure you can think of a dozen parents or uncles or sisters, or maybe yourself, who prove this completely false, but the belief is out there. And so I think for AAPIs, if you appear to go along with something, if you do something that fits into the mold, of course you did. And then if you don't, that's off-putting. So you're either disrupting the conversation in a way that people don't always know how to react to, or your voice isn't being heard. And so to overcome, I mean, at this point, not a direct analogy, but at this point, when I see a woman in a leadership role, I just assume she had to be twice as competent or twice as hardworking as her male counterpart to get there. And so for AAPIs, there are these structural issues that we can and we should make progress on. But as an individual, you just have to be so clearly qualified, so clearly knowledgeable, so clearly deliberative, so clearly worth listening to. And I'm not saying it's fair, it's not fair, but I have seen that time after time.
Cath and Freda, or I guess.
Hi, yes, I'll talk a little bit about this, about some of the greatest challenges that we faced in starting a small, scrappy, woman-led business that does work in the field of education. We've done this for about 5 years, and when we started this in 2018, there was no one talking about bringing Asian American or Pacific Islander stories to K through 12 classrooms or PK through 12 classrooms. No one talked about, hey, this is something that little kids need to be learning about. If we have a book list, we need to have at least a few book lists that represent the stories of Chinese Americans and their contributions to their company, to this country. There needs to be some on Native Hawaiians. There needs to be some on Fijians and Samoans, which I know I had a sizable population in my own classroom of Pacific Islanders in the East Bay. But there wasn't really rich conversations happening about this. And I know this is going to seem a little bit wild, but Freda and I became teachers in the 90s and early 2000s, and we represent a very, very small minority of public school teachers in this country. And so it makes sense that these conversations weren't happening in PK through 12. But one thing that we sought to do was say, hey, we're trying to build a pan-Asian organization that brings these stories to children and to adolescents. And that in of itself is a very challenging mission, right? Because AAPI means so many things. And in some ways, we're still struggling with that definitionally. So it meant trying to extend the knowledge of Asian America, particularly beyond just Japanese American incarceration, Chinese American railroad workers, and the Chinese Exclusion Act. And what does that mean to really build a base of knowledge for young people that goes beyond those? Because those are the only things that appear in state standards, and there are lots of research around that. And so what we're trying to do is build a vibrant, politically rich organization that tries to tell these stories to young people. And believe me, it's not easy to choose which kinds of stories we tell, to build partnerships in which we can tell stories of AAPIs in the Caribbean, in the Philippines, and elsewhere, those migration stories. and to make sure that we are accountable to the richness of that community. So I think the biggest challenge, yes, has been one, even having these conversations that this belongs in K through 12 schools, one, and two, that we really do reflect what constitutes Asian America. And oh, we could have so many interesting conversations about projects we've done where we talked about, ooh, does Central Asia belong? We talk about AAPIs. Do Caribbean, Indo-Caribbeans belong in these conversations? To which we say yes, yes, and yes, but it's not easy, and we're one organization.
Great. Treasure, would you like to answer?
Yeah, I also, like Freda, grew up, Freda, I'm interested to know where you grew up, but I was born and raised in Chinatown, lived with my grandparents for the first 4 years, where my parents worked in Yonkers, and they would come and pick me up on the weekends, and finally saved enough money with a little help from my grandparents to buy a house in Great Neck, Long Island. And like Freda, I was one of like 6 kids that was not Jewish. And I was treated pretty well, I think. I did not feel a lot of discrimination growing up. Maybe it's because I'm a girl. My brother, on the other hand, did have difficulties as a child. And then, like Freda, when I moved to California, I was like, whoa, I'm Chinese. Look at all these Chinese people, you know? It was like a whole awakening. But we're more than that here in California. We speak 78 languages, for example. The fact that we are the 5th or 4th largest economy in the world is really due to our diversity and our entrepreneurial spirit, and everybody coming to this country, right, for the American dream. And so I think we're very, very lucky. Yesterday, I was speaking at a women's event, and we were talking about, history. I think when people ask as a politician, is it harder to run as an Asian or harder to run as a woman? And for me, it's been harder to run as a woman, because people will always say, oh, are you married? Do you have kids? Like, how are you going to, maybe you should wait and have kids before you run for office, right? And these are other women telling me, advising me about what I should be doing versus, hey, you should go for it, right? We're going to be there to support you. And there's a reason that there's never been a woman governor in the state of California. I can now see why. It's because of the power and who controls all the money, and it's not the women. Even though women, we're great at networking and stepping in and volunteering, but when it comes to writing $10,000 checks, how many of us can really do that? We have to wait and ask our father or spouse. And so until that changes, we're never going to see a woman president in the United States as well. But yesterday, I was at a women's conference, and we were talking about how it wasn't that long ago that women could have their own credit cards in their name. That was like in 1972, right? The ERA passed also about then in 1972, and it was ratified in 2020, yet it's still not in our Constitution that all women should be treated equally in everything that men are. And then I started to think about Asian Americans now. There are 15 US states that have passed laws restricting foreign nationals from buying property, particularly ag land. That's 15 US states. 20 other states are currently in process of passing similar legislation. And that is really targeted at us, Asian Americans, that these laws are being passed. And so, talking, hearing Scott, right, it's sometimes frustrating because we are in these positions where we're able to do certain things here in California, at the state or local level, but we are pretty powerless, right, when it comes to what other states are doing. And, beating back the stereotypes that, we're spies or we're not strong or we're not, capable of doing certain jobs. So I totally agree with, everyone here on this call that there's just so much more that needs to be done, but also that we are not monolithic, right? When you say APIs, we speak, how many different languages, right? We're from so many different countries. We're the same because we look the same, but we are not the same in terms of, some of our upbringing, our traditions, our religion, for example. So it's just really, it's harder for us to kind of come together as one group versus other minority groups.
Yeah. And Hudson?
Go with this one because when Catherine was answering about what stories do we tell, it kind of spotlighted one of the biggest problems I think we're facing is just solidarity among all the Asian communities because we are so diverse, right? Like, Southeast Asian, East Asian, different generations Asian, you know, everyone has different goals, priorities, and needs, and it's been very hard to get everyone to kind of demand the same thing. And so our ask and our push for a lot of causes gets kind of spread thin and it becomes a lot more noisy than it is like productive. And I've seen a lot of kind of almost political infighting in between different groups and community members and teams like that breaks my heart because right now like we need everyone to come together to fight, and it doesn't mean one need is more important than another need. It's trying to find the right time and the right people that you can build that trust with to continue fighting and raise the tide for all of us to succeed. So I'll keep it short. I think, building solidarity among all of our Asian community, that's one of the biggest challenges that I see, that I have personally encountered, building our grassroots nonprofit as well.
Yeah, I think solidarity is like such a big thing, especially, during this month. And so as I mentioned, the goal of this event is about representation and why it matters. And I think that kind of plays into the whole solidarity theme. I guess in each of your perspectives, why is AAPI representation necessary in politics and in social advocacy? And how does AAPI representation impact these achievements that, all of you guys have made? Hudson, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Kind of going off what Fiona just said about that law that's banning agricultural land purchases. Every law and policy is written so it doesn't look racist, right? Like they're not going to write and pass a law that looks racist. But if you don't have a champion in there to see through basically the BS and fight for you, you're not going to have that insight. So it's super important because it is only people that understand your community and culture that can really fight for it. No one will fight harder for you than your own people, right? So you have to have your real champions in there to kind of guide all of us together, and then that's where the social advocacy happens because advocacy will die if there's no results from it. And if there's no results from it, there's not going to get any people in political power to get those. So it becomes a downward spiral if we don't have the right support system in place to help each other out. And so, it goes back to that solidarity at first, but there's also like solidarity between the different layers of politics and social advocacy, because we need all of it to work well. And part of it is this sense of community and culture that you can't teach. Like no one's going to go out there and learn more about our culture than the people who live it. And if you don't have cultural champions that understand how our lives are truly impacted, you're not going to have effective policies to represent our communities. So I'll stop there before I keep going.
Yeah. Council member, do you like to?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not just because someone with an AAPI background can represent the interests of AAPI communities, although that's true and hugely important, but it's also for me because the way to overcome stereotypes is through repeated, sustained interaction between different communities. And so in the present, I think representation is necessary to ensure that AAPI communities have a seat at the table, that our voices are heard, that the issues that matter to our communities are addressed. And then in the long run, it's necessary for those reasons, but also so that we can break down barriers to understanding break down these stereotypes, and that every small win along the way doesn't have to feel like a major obstacle being overcome like it sometimes does today.
Can I just add that Asians were not used to kind of being out on the street, right? When Black Lives Matters happened, I mean, millions of people went and hit the streets, many of us, marching side by side with our allies. Then when the Asian hate crimes happened, nobody really came out for us. And it took many of us, like my father, who's never, been out there at a protest, to come with me and, hold the sign and march. This was down in Palo Alto, right? I mean, that was the first time. But he and others felt like if we don't stand up or they don't stand up, then who's going to stand up for us? But I don't see a lot of our, allies like marching with us, right? And that's something I think we need to learn as Asians is like, we want people to stand up for us, but we need to also stand up for other people. And traditionally, I think Asians just want to mind their own business, be very quiet, just drive in their home, not talk to their neighbors, as long as their kids are doing well in school, just very insular. But in this community and in politics, like, Scott, we're out there every single day and we need our friends and allies. But that means we also have to show up when others need our help, when something is not right, when there is injustice that's happening.
Yeah. Freda, would you like to add?
Yeah, I mean, just to echo what everyone's been saying, I think it's extremely, hugely important for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders to be the ones to represent and advocate because, often others will not be the ones to initiate these. I mean, I witnessed that firsthand, helping to bring Asian American studies to Northwestern. And this is what's happened to all college campuses. We're in San Francisco, so SF State similarly has an Asian American Studies department because of student Asian Americans fighting for that. And I mean, interestingly enough, as Cath said, when we began in 2018, there weren't really a lot of people, very few people who were strongly advocating for Asian American studies in K through 12 schools. And of course, the pandemic completely flipped everything on its head in terms of activism for, Black Lives Matter. And then of course, the anti-Asian racism. I mean, a lot of the groups that we've been talking to in schools, I mean, I have worked with school districts, Cath has worked with school districts, independently of the community, but many of the efforts, as you've seen in the news with Illinois being the first state to mandate Asian American history being taught as a unit. I mean, this all began with the Asian American community. And we've met so many parent-led groups in the LA area, in New Jersey, in Atlanta, all forming these organizations. Their parents, their former corporate workers, and they just, they just saw the violence and the terrible things happening and wanted to do something about it. And it's through these organizations where we've been able to get some inroads into schools, like in New Jersey, that's been a specific point. It's not that the school districts are there saying, hi, we really want Asian American studies in our school.
Definitely not.
Yeah, I mean, Cath can speak more to that because she's the one that's been dealing with New Jersey specifically. So
we don't know if we have any Asian American parents here on the call, but we love you. We love you because you are doing the hard work to bring these conversations to schools. So thank you, parents. Thank you.
Yeah. So like we've talked a little bit about challenges each of you guys face. I guess what is the biggest, I don't know if there necessarily is a biggest, but what is the biggest challenge that you think the AAPI community overall faces, and how can we work to resolve that as well? Let's see, Hudson, do you want to start us off again?
Yeah, I'll go something different from, bringing solidarity. I think generally agreed and it's hard to do. But one of the a little bit more tactical, kind of what Fiona was saying is, how do we get others to step up for us, right? Like, how do we activate the unactivated, both Asian and non-Asian, relative to the space? And one thing that has bothered me deeply is why haven't any of the universities held any kind of protest or any kind of talks for the community? They're up in arms about Black Lives Matter, Ukraine, and currently the Palestinian conflicts. But Stop AAPI Hate, I don't remember really seeing anything from any of the student body. And without the youth, honestly, we're in a tough spot. And so, with Asian Strong, we're always trying to think of different ways to activate the community. So we recently had our Heritage 5K in San Francisco that runs from Japantown and Chinatown. You hit 14 AAPI landmarks on the way. And that was really because we wanted, how do you activate the youth? Like, what do they come out to? You know, because we know they don't always want to go to a protest for 2 hours and listen to people yelling about social policies and things we got to do in our politics, right? So we're always thinking about how do we activate the unactivated, and that's one of the biggest ones. So we're always going to continue finding new ways. So in March we have our Asian Woman event that celebrates the Asian woman, because March is Women's History Month. We take a day out. Exactly. There you go, Fiona. I got some extra t-shirts for all of you if you guys want some too. But yeah, so we're trying to find ways to really activate people that might not be activated in a certain way, because working in education, like you all know, everyone learns differently. Some people will get triggered by a different event that will get them on their journey of social advocacy or community work. So that's not my biggest one. Like if we can crack the code on getting the universities and youth and allies to flood the streets in thousands and millions and mobilizing, that to me is the biggest challenge I want to crack.
Can I just piggyback on Hudson? Voting is something that I am totally disappointed in. And when I moved out here to San Francisco, I ran in the Sunset District back in 2002. Sunset District is half Chinese and half Irish, before that Catholics, right? I could not depend on my community to come out and vote for me, right? Some of them would come out and vote, but for the majority, they would say, oh, I'm not registered, or, oh, I'm busy, or, don't bother me. It's dinner time. Don't call me anymore, right? And that's really, was disheartening. And even to this day, I have been trying to get more and more Asians to vote. But because of the Stop Asian Hate movement in San Francisco, a lot of the Asians, can you let her out of the room? A lot of the Asians now have discovered voting and their power at the ballot box. We had a DA that was not going to do anything, not going to prosecute, not going to stand up with us, not say, any of this was wrong. And so what did the Asians do? They mobilized and they recalled the DA. Then there were 3 school board members that were not really pro, Asians. They were not reelected. And so now in San Francisco, people are really, focused. We ran slates on the Democratic Central County Committee. There's kind of like the moderates and the progressives here in San Francisco. I mean, we're all Asian, but the core issues we care about are a little bit different. And out of the 24 seats, I think the moderates took 20 of the seats because they organized. They went door to door. They made phone calls. They made sure their friends and family voted. So that's a big change for us. And if we all went to the ballot box and voted, trust me, we would get more resources. We would get more attention. We would have more allies than we do right now.
Councilmember, do you have anything?
Yeah, I would say you said greatest problem facing, I think, marginalization. So the AAPI communities being an afterthought. So I think it's some combination of the sort of lingering myth of the model minority. If you think about some of the larger communities or communities that have been here for multiple generations. And then if you think about some of the smaller communities and Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders, it's also a numbers problem, whether it's these local health assessments. We just had one in Union City where there isn't enough Pacific Islander data to show the statistics. It just says NA in some of these boxes, or even in national and statewide polling, sometimes they can't always get a statistically significant sample of AAPIs as a whole. And so you're just not showing some of this data. But basically, for a variety of reasons, it's still hard to be heard. And it's still a battle to be involved. And I think just like other historically marginalized groups, not just racial and ethnic groups, also women, LGBTQ+, people with disabilities, there's no monolithic AAPI community, as Treasurer Ma had mentioned before. And so that's also a challenge. I think we come together because there's strength in numbers, there's some shared histories. We're certainly viewed similarly from the outside, but it also requires thoughtfulness around what are AAPI issues and who within the various AAPI communities gets to have a seat at the table. But we need to keep fighting that fight. And I think organizations and leaders like the folks who are on this panel, we're as a collective making progress changing hearts and minds. Doesn't always feel like we are, but I think you see that incremental progress as you look at the broader arc.
Yeah. Cath.
Hi, yeah, it's such a challenging question to ask. What is the greatest problem that our entire community face? But I think I'll just speak on a more micro level because the small is universal. So Freda and I are, of course, an education organization, and we create curriculum. And right now, one of the biggest challenges that we're facing in the field of education is that we have all this legislation that's been passed, thanks to voters and thanks to people like Scott and Fiona, who are working right in the field of politics to pass mandates to teach about Asian America in various states like Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, starting in Illinois, and more to come. But it really is a question of maybe what Hudson was saying about a tactical effort. How, in very finely tuned ways, do we bring these stories to schools in ways that's not simply transmitting information? I think one of the problems that we're seeing, and I'll let Freda maybe jump on this too, is that when we try to teach about Asian America, it's not just about transmitting information about laws and legislation and about certain historical figures during a Heritage Month. It's more than just including them in a celebratory week. It's about seeing it as everyday practical work. And I think we are named after Yuri Kochiyama. And the reason we named ourselves after Yuri was not only her commitment to interracial work, right? She was a longtime resident of Harlem, a great friend of Malcolm X. But her work was tireless, but it was also very micro, meaning that every day she got up to go to her job, waitressing and serving at a restaurant, while she was also writing down notes for who wanted to get in touch with who was put in prison that week for protesting, whose families needed to get letters out to them. And I think one of the things that we really believe in as a curriculum organization is to tell really specific, finely tuned stories of everyday work in ways where you get kids to connect with them. You get kids really excited about people like Yuri and what she did with her life in Harlem for so many years and how funny and magnetic she was. And I think that's really what we'd like to do, is just try to bring creativity and imagination to the work of Asian America. And Freda, I don't know if you want to jump in, but we find there's a lot of curriculum that doesn't have that sort of spirited approach that we want kids to feel excited.
Yeah, I mean, I've been talking about that a lot more, and I know that there's a lot of challenges in schools right now because of COVID, and they're so addicted to the screens and everything, and lack of engagement, and so on and so forth. And you know, as a teacher, Cath and I were very much about how can we actively teach about the subjects. So, you know, I never wanted to just place a person in there without giving it any context and without it really being integrated into what I'm doing in the classroom. And I think it's so important to not just say, oh, well, you know, it like what people do with Martin Luther King Jr. You know, it's like, okay, here he was, you know, this is what he did. But really like have it be part of like, yeah, interwoven into your curriculum as, you know, it's normal, it's part of who we are, it's the fabric of our society. And so how do we get people to go? I mean, there's these books, there's this book that I have that says Beyond Heroes and Holidays, right? I think representation is a great start, but how can we get beyond representation, right? And to really get at the heart of who are all of these important figures, Asian American, Pacific Islander figures, since, you know, the beginning of the United States, even before the United States, Asians have been here. So how do we really, yeah, make that part of the narrative?
Yeah, I think that's like a great segue into the next set of questions, which are more targeted to your individual work. I guess we could start with Councilmember Sakakihara. As someone in politics in Union City, you know, you've mentioned that it's predominantly Asian. What kind of significance does your AAPI background hold for you in terms of representation, and how does it like contribute to your effectiveness in advocating for or like understanding the needs of the community?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really helped to be able to, I think someone else mentioned this as well, but to be able to leave Union City after growing up here and then come back. And also having continued experiences around the country through civilian work in the Navy, it makes me better understand the context I'm operating in and advocating in when I'm in Union City. So it helps me recognize how unique of a situation we face in Union City. I think it's 56% AAPI last census, and but also just that because we're a majority AAPI city, that doesn't automatically mean all issues relevant to AAPI communities are solved, or that we don't need to advocate for the needs of AAPI communities, right? And having those other contexts operating in theaters with very few other individuals with AAPI backgrounds, working at companies with large numbers of AAPI engineers, but relatively few AAPI leaders. And even in Alameda County, when the number of elected AAPI leaders is surprisingly low relative to the population, that I didn't realize till I got elected myself within the past 2 years. That helps with effectively advocating for Union City's residents in this broader system, you know, regional, state, federal government, companies, nonprofits, other stakeholders, and understanding that that same level of representation is not present throughout the ecosystem, and that Union City can be, and the Bay Area in general, can be a leader in this area.
Yeah. And I guess to Freda and Cath, you know, you guys have mentioned YURI has taken a diverse range of projects and workshops and collaborations, you know, with Smithsonian, or like Sesame Street. And I guess among all of these projects that you guys have worked on, are there any specific projects that are particularly significant to each of you?
Sure, I'll start. Yeah, I mean, there was a collaboration that we had with the Center for Asian American Media based in San Francisco, as many of you are aware. And yeah, I've been in touch with Stephen Gong. I met him a number of years ago, and we've always wanted to work together. And fortunately and unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we were presented with an opportunity to really do some sort of educational effort. And, you know, this was personal for me to create this curriculum called Anti-Asian Racism, Connections in History, in partnership with CAM. And it's on PBS Learning Media because CAM is an affiliate of PBS. And I just feel really proud that I was able to somehow have the energy to do this during such a difficult time in all of our lives. But I was so driven to do something because of all the horrific things going on around the world, particularly against our community. And, you know, I was able to profile Vincent Chin as one of them, the people in history, as well as a number of other examples in different Asian American communities as examples. Oh, thanks, Cath, for popping that in. And yeah, it's funny because the curriculum started as part of a class I was taking, like on curriculum design. And then CAM's opportunity popped up. And so I'm very proud of that curriculum. But yeah, Cass, do you want to talk about what?
I could just say briefly about the work we recently did with Sesame Street Workshop. We were involved in consulting on an episode of Sesame Street featuring their new puppet, Ji Young. I don't know if any of you know this, but Sesame Street introduced to their core cast of characters a Korean American puppet named Ji Young. And we're very proud to work with Sesame on consulting. And you have to Google Ji Young because she's very cute. She wears a little denim vest with patches on it. She skateboards and plays the electric guitar. And I think that's the kind of things we want to see in terms of representation. A little girl who is fully herself in all her idiosyncrasies. Please watch it. It's on HBO Max now.
Treasurer Ma, a lot of your, you know, work focuses on financing for different social programs and managing the state budget. How do you see your work intersecting with supporting and advocating for the AAPI communities?
Yeah, so everything I do in the treasurer's office has to be transparent and accountable. And that means when there are certain marginalized communities that haven't been getting their fair share, for example, I'm able to, create, sometimes it's a competitive system, sometimes it's through regulations, sometimes it's, understanding who needs what. So I'll give you a couple of real life examples. After the pandemic, many of our hospitals have not been doing well because the way hospitals make their money is really specialty procedures like hip or knee. And then during COVID, they could only take COVID patients. They were not open for anything else. So many of them fell behind in their operating, being able to pay their operating costs. And so we gave out, I think, 17 zero interest loans to those hospitals that are distressed, meaning they are one payroll away from being bankrupt or even in bankruptcy. And many of them were in our low, highly marginalized communities. And that's because, I travel around to 58 states. I actually know which ones need help. Similarly, we deposit a certain amount of money into local community banks headquartered in the state of California. And when I first started, only some of the banks that were in the big cities like the Bay Area or LA was getting money. And I said, well, how about the Central Valley? How about, North? Some of the rural communities, Imperial, right? Modoc, Del Norte. And they were like, oh, okay. We didn't know we should reach out to them proactively. And I said, yes, please send them a letter, call the president of the bank, come on webinars when they're having these meetings and talk about the ability for us to deposit money so that they can lend it out easier to the communities. Small business loans. Similarly, we got $28 billion from the federal government due to COVID, and we had to roll out a lot of these monies pretty quickly to different communities that needed it. And we worked with a small business lender called Lendistry, owned by an African-American couple. And they did a great job in getting the money out to those communities that needed it, right? Like tenants, healthcare workers, people who wanted to keep their employees employed. So there's ways when we're talking about money and policy that we can shape the narrative or at least direct our attention to certain communities that don't necessarily get the attention that they deserve.
Yeah, and I guess to Hudson, a part of Asians Are Strong's goals emphasizes community safety, as I think you've mentioned, like workshops for the elderly. Why is it crucial to equip the elderly with self-defense skills, and how does this effort align with broader AAPI objectives?
Yeah, obviously you want your seniors to be safe and have that standard of living, but I think Gandhi said the true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable members. And for us, it's like they are attacking our seniors and our women. So we have a responsibility to take care of them. And if we don't take care of them, who will? And it seeks to the character of our own Asian community as well. And on top of, obviously wanting to protect them, to me, this is what is a unifying thing for a lot of the Asian communities. A lot of us got active, especially the new grassroots ones, because of these attacks on our seniors. You can fight for whatever political initiative or campaign you want. No one would disagree that you need to protect your elders. That was a moral barrier that got broken the last couple of years that has put all the Asian communities on edge. For myself, growing up in San Francisco, I've been blessed to have a great support system, but we've all dealt with racism. We will continue to deal with racism, unfortunately. But back in the day, that line was never crossed. No one targeted your seniors and women. Because that moral barrier was crossed, that actually unified a lot of our community. That's why the recall with Chesa Bodine happened. They're like, hey, if you're not going to take care, we're going to do something. And all of a sudden that starts to activate people. That kind of goes back to bringing that solidarity together. As long as there's two things in the world, I think, bringing people together. Either you have a common goal or you have a common enemy. And so if you have a common goal to protect your seniors, all of a sudden you can start building that together. And that's why we really focus on it as well. Another more psychological aspect of it is also because human safety is a basic need, right? On the Maslow hierarchy, it is literally next to food and shelter, and then it's physiological safety. That's before you can feel empowered or feel go out there and any self-actualization and any enjoyment. You have to feel safe. And because when we did our first protest rally, what you call it, in City Hall, when I told you how we all started with a bunch of friends, I texted a whole bunch of friends to come out. That week, someone got attacked in New York because the mom and daughter were going to an anti-Asian hate rally. Protest Stop Asian Hate rally, and they were verbally harassed on the train going there. So a lot of people got afraid to come out, and that was something in my mind. Like, I know there's a lot of people who care and want to do something, but if they don't feel safe, it's going to be very hard for them to do anything else, like go vote or anything like that. And it's not just a physical safety, right? There's emotional and financial safety as well. Talking about like, how do you get people to speak up at work? A lot of people don't want to speak up because they don't want to be the first. Being the first to do anything is usually very scary because you're not sure what that safety net is. So if we can create a safety net out there, it can empower people to do more. And if you're not going to protect the most vulnerable, then who will you protect? And so that's why it's like near and dear to our heart and our mission to kind of take care of the elderly. Also, it is really fun to see the grandmas yell at each other when they're doing self-defense move. If you're ever in town and you want to come to one of our self-defense classes with the elderly, we try to teach it in language too, which is a whole nother monster. But they actually have fun, and it's also part of this cross-generational community building, right? Like, if I want them to go vote, they're not going to be like, who am I? Who am I going to trust this bald Asian guy, right? But if I put my time in there and spend time with them, you build that trust, then they think that there's something valuable to be there. So, it kind of ties into this kind of community safety and being stronger together.
I would love to talk a little bit about the youth as well, now that we've talked about, helping the elderly. And I think this question also ties with someone who asked in the Q&A about parents empowering their kids. But what are some actions that AAPI youth can take to get their voices heard by elected officials or social organizations? And how can we mobilize, this group of people?
Yeah, so I'll start because I've had about 1,000 interns come through my 4 elected offices, and it usually starts with the parents, right? Because the parents need to put something on their resume that they interned in my office. But then once they come to my office, that's our ability to really educate them about the political process, about government, about what we really do, about how to empower yourself, and why there aren't more Asians in elected office. Right now, San Francisco has about one Asian left on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, and reporters are always asking me, well, why is that? And I said, 20 years ago when I got elected, I was the only Asian, okay? So I've seen it, and we've gone over the years, I think we've had 5 out of the 11 APIs, but when it comes down to now the Asian community in San Francisco, we're just not going to vote for just the Asian face anymore, right? We want to know what they stand for. And right now, a lot of San Franciscans, we care about public safety. We want to feel safe in our homes and our streets. We care about education. A lot of the kids can't walk to their neighborhood elementary school, which is not safe. How the kids going to get across town? Many of them work 2 or 3 jobs. These are some of the things that we care about. And then we care about our small businesses, right? Making sure it's protected, that someone can't come and, rob us. And all the retail theft that's happening, where people just, walk out with, merchandise, and you can't even do anything to stop it because nobody's going to prosecute it. And so the police don't want to do anything. And it just feels like a hopeless situation. So, having those young people intern in my office, volunteer on campaigns, it may or may not be for them to run for office, but at least they understand that this is their right and their privilege, democracy, voting, electing the people that they think are going to represent them, but also being part of the process. So I always say, get out of your community, I know your parents want you to go and study and play soccer on the weekends or gymnastics, but you need to give some time to community service. Get out there, clean the street, right? Do a walk, like Hudson said. Do something that's for the greater good instead of just, you know, your own family in your own house.
Yeah. Freda and Cal.
Sure, I think both Frida and I are of the mind that one needs to know your own history first, right? So we sincerely believe in also taking it slow and reading books like Yuri Kochiyama's memoir, getting to know some of the major legislation in our country that barred Asian immigration, trying to understand the connection between US imperialism and Asian American and Pacific Islander migration, trying to even understand your own family's history and talking about it with your friends are all vital steps in your own journey to political awakeness. Yuri Kochiyama teaches us that political engagement is a lifelong process. It's not something that happens immediately or because you do one or two things. It happens slowly over time. And we really sincerely believe in that. So learn, read, talk to your elders, understand who you are. And that's one step to a much longer life of political engagement.
Yeah. Hudson.
Yeah, I mean, get active, man, do something. You're gonna figure out what the right thing is. All of us have gone on such a different journey to get to where we are now. You're gonna find impact somewhere, but like to me is be proud. Like if you're not proud to be Asian, AAPI, like no one else will be. You know, and that's the only way we're gonna activate more people is they find pride in being activated and part of the community. I've gotten such a new sense of community and strength and pride in my community over the last couple of years because of this activism work that I don't think I could have ever felt in my own community. And I've been proud to be Asian for a long time, you know, breaking stereotypes. You know, I played football in high school. I was a firefighter, did MMA and stuff like that. I still have never felt as proud through the connections I have made. Like today, I never thought I would be talking to Fiona Ma on a panel about AAPI representation. If I told my friends, like, how did you get on that panel? You know, but I'm gonna take every moment I can to make my own history right now. And I think I hope the youth would take pride in it. And I think, like, you know, for me, and I'm gonna talk about my personal experience. I grew up with a lot of guilt in the Asian community because that whole narrative of assimilation got internalized kind of like guilt for us, right? Like, oh, don't be too Asian and stuff like that. Like their food stinks and things like that as well. Now I'm like, well, I'm about to eat that fish over there. So if you don't like it, you're gonna have to move. You know, like these things to be proud of and have that conversation with people, your friends, and building those relationships. So get active, get connected to us, go volunteer with Fiona or Yuri or anybody. You know, to me, like get that foot, get that bug, and start to learn about yourself because you're gonna learn a lot about who you are through this process.
Yeah. Council member.
Yeah, I think I was focused on the part of the question about the having youth voices heard by elected officials, and I want to focus on the local government side since obviously that's my arena. But Union City, for example, small enough that you can literally call up or email your council member or the mayor or city staff, and you should get a response, right? And so you can come to the council meetings and speak. You can go to a community event, and one of those elected leaders should be there. And if you want to see change at the local level, I feel like there's a relatively direct line compared to other levels of seeing from here to there. And so that, I mean, that's why I ran for office is our city switched to districts from at large. And my district was basically, oh, there's my parents' house on one end, and there's the elementary school I went to, and there's my sister-in-law's house, and my wife's cousin, my wife's aunt, you know, the parents of all my friends from school. And I thought this is totally doable. I can make this change at this level. I don't know about influencing at the federal or global level or whatever, right? But
I think you're muted. Oh.
sorry, I think I accidentally muted myself. But it turns out at the local level too, it's still change is really slow in government, and you need sustained effort. You don't just send one email or come speak one time. It takes perseverance, but it does happen. I think eventually everything changes, and it's just whether or not you're involved in influencing how things change or you're not, right? And so the same is true specifically for AAPI youth. We've had a couple different issues in our city recently that many AAPI youth from our high school came out to speak on. And in one case, they really moved the needle. It took way longer than it should have taken. It was sustained effort over the course of, in some of their cases, their almost entire high school tenure it took. But eventually we did pass a very aggressive tobacco retail ordinance was one of the issues that they were advocating for because of their, I think largely because of their sustained effort.
Can I just jump on about young people? Evan Lowe. I don't know if anyone's been following Evan Lowe for Congress's race, but he is in a Silicon Valley, highly Asian, San Jose, Vietnamese, Chinese, Korean, every population down there. And we thought he lost on election day by, a sizable margin. And then when the votes started coming in, he was, Sam Liccardo, the former mayor of San Jose, had clearly won, but the second and third place was between Evan and a longstanding elected official, older Caucasian man. And it was like, Evan's up one vote, Evan's down one vote, Evan's up one vote, he's up 2 votes, 3 votes, back and forth, back and forth. And then finally, after the recount, Evan won by 8 votes. It shouldn't have been that close, right? So that's like a message, like Scott's at the local level. I was there, now I'm at the state level. I'm defending and fighting and, doing what I can, but we need more people at in Congress, because federal is even a bigger mammoth, right? A bigger behemoth of bureaucracy and laws and things that pass at the federal level, right, can really affect what happens in the states. And so we all need to just, divide and conquer, so to speak, but then also figure out how to support each other. And when we need something at the local level, right, we should be able to call Scott. If he needs something at the state level, he should be able to count on me. If we need something at the federal level, we should be able to call, our state, our federal elected officials. And that's how we're going to start to create parity. If we have more of us, all over the place in education and in business and in Hollywood and banking and law and accounting and politics, we just don't have that, those numbers in leadership.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I have one final question. I know that there are some questions in the Q&A, so if any of the panelists want to type a response, since we're kind of getting close to time, you're more than welcome to. And obviously keep sending your questions in. But anyway, all right, the last question is, if there's one message each of you could leave to the AAPI community or just in general to everybody here today, what would that message be? Councilmember, do you want to start?
Yeah, first I just say thank you for listening in. I think we get caught up in the day-to-day activity, so we really need avenues like this to take a step back and think about where we've come from, where we're at, where we need to go. And I think if there's something you think you might want to do, but you're not sure if you can, whether it's starting a nonprofit, volunteering for a cause, running for office, whatever it is, first try it out, talk to people who do it, volunteer for a nonprofit or campaign or whatever while you're still in school or if you're working, then on the side. And then second, if you like it, then just do it, right? And I know other panelists have already made this point, but I think, on the one hand, you're probably underestimating your own abilities and voice and impact for the same reasons AAPI's voices more broadly are discounted. And on the other hand, because you're part of a community whose voices are underrepresented, it's even more imperative that you get involved in and be part of the solution. So again, I think there are structural and systemic reasons why AAPIs are underrepresented, but and we need to address those well, but at the individual level, we have to overcome those barriers by going out and doing it, whatever your specific it is.
I guess Hudson, do you want to?
Yeah, segueing from what Scott said, go out there, get it done. You know what I mean? Like, for me, I'm a type of person, I hate complaining about something I'm not willing to put in the work for. And it doesn't mean you have to start a nonprofit like everyone here or run for say. There's something you can do. Anything. Start small, then grow it to be bigger from there. I personally think that we are in a very pivotal time in history for the Asian community, AAPI community. Like history is going to be written now. Yuri and the Cat and Freda, they're going to write about this in the curriculum a couple of years down the road, and hopefully all of us are on the right side of it. And so everyone listening today, you know, you have taken out precious time out of your day to join us on a Monday afternoon to listen to us and talk about what we're doing for the community. You're going to be part of history, either big or small. It's up to you what you want to do. And so I hope everyone feels a little bit empowered to get out there and to do their own little part, whatever that might be.
Yeah. Cath and Freda, do you guys have a message?
Yeah, I'm just thinking so much about this rich conversation and, you know, how diverse the Asian American and Pacific Islander community is, and becoming active and, you know, getting to know your identity and voting and civic engagement and all of those things. And I feel like, you know, I'm glad Hudson talked about the small steps because, you know, for all of you overachiever Asian Americans out there, I was in that camp, thanks to my parents. But you know, we can always start small, and something that's been coming up for me as I've been listening to you all is to just stay curious, And I feel that there is so much diversity in our community, political views, ideas, you know, identity and things like that. And I think in order for us to build solidarity, in order for us to become more civically engaged, to care about things that are outside of our home and, you know, eating at home with our family, I think it really starts with being curious. I mean, that's how I came into my own identity. I was curious about my background, and so I joined a student organization, an Asian American student organization, when I went to college. Even though I felt so conflicted, I didn't want to hang out with too many Asians at the same time, and even though my roommate was Asian. But, you know, because I was curious, it really led me down this path of activism, and then, you know, eventually becoming a teacher and then starting this business. So you just never know, but I think curiosity is really important to hone in on and to keep your mind open.
Treasure Ma?
Yeah, there's so many things. There's not one message, I guess. Obviously being curious, but listen and learn. There is no right answer. And these days with social media, the media, they are all one-sided. And if you only listen to one station, or you're only on one, you know, social media, you're going to get very skewed a certain way. So, you know, like Freda said, you know, be curious, ask other people's opinions, listen to, you know, talk. If you listen to a radio station every day, listen to something that's on the opposite end of the spectrum, right? You may not agree, or it may change your mind a little bit. Open up your, you know, your opinions, because someone is going to call you out and they're going to not like you for something. And, you know, you want to be on that side where you're like, yes, I've heard you. I've taken all these issues into consideration. I may not agree with you on this issue, but I hope we can agree on the other one, versus, you know, just talking about whatever, you know, Fox News says, or, you know, people on X, right? Because they're just a lot one-sided. So I would say, you know, get out there, talk to people, listen, learn more about things instead of just taking the easy way out.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And so thank you everyone for being here today. That was kind of the last question I had planned. A big thank you to everybody who has attended and spent time listening to all of the panelists. Hopefully you guys have gained something out of this. And obviously, thank you to all of the panelists, you know, for offering your time and being a part of this discussion.
Thank you, Valerie, for stepping up and organizing this. You know, the supervisor is not here and you're still like, I got it. You know, that shows a lot of confidence and leadership. So good for you.
Yeah. Okay, we'll conclude the event here. Thank you everyone for being here. And yeah, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, feel free to reach out.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay,
everybody.
Nice job, everyone. Good
you.
seeing you.
Have a great
meeting
night.
you.